The day Adaeze entered Umuagu as Chief Ibu's new wife, the whole village seemed to hum with life. The road from the highway wound gently into the heart of the community, framed by tall palm trees that swayed lazily in the afternoon breeze. Small roadside kiosks stood proudly along the tarred street, their wooden counters stacked with roasted plantain, ground nuts, and oranges. The smell of fried akara floated in the air, mingling with the faint beat of drums drifting from somewhere deep in the village square. In the back seat of a silver SUV, Adaeze sat quietly, her fingers smoothing the folds of her gold-printed Ankara wrapper. The fabric shimmered softly under the sunlight streaming through the window, and around her wrist, a slim bracelet of coral beads clinked gently with each movement. Her makeup was light but flawless, her hair wrapped neatly in a sky-blue ichafu that matched the Ankara perfectly. She had dressed carefully that morning, knowing that first impressions in a place like Umuagu were everything. This wasn't just any visit. Today was the day of her formal arrival at the palace, the last stage of her marriage rites. The Igbo Nkwu ceremony, held weeks earlier in Enugu, had been lavish, blending city elegance with touches of tradition. But this was different. This was her true introduction to her husband's people. Adaeze had met Chief Ibu in a world far from here. It had been at a charity gala in Enugu, one of those evenings where city lights glittered through tall hotel windows and soft jazz played while businessmen and politicians mingled over champagne. She had been there to represent her firm, wearing a simple black gown that night. He had approached her with a calm confidence, dressed in a deep red iziagu embroidered with golden lions, his head crowned with a black okpu cap. His handshake was firm, his smile warm, and his eyes held that quiet authority that made people listen without him raising his voice. She had known him first as a man who built businesses, donated to schools, and spoke of community as though it were a living being. Only later did she learn he was the traditional ruler of Umuagu, a title that carried both privilege and enormous responsibility. Their courtship was short but intense, filled with long conversations and careful listening. She had agreed to marry him, fully aware she was not only becoming his partner in life, but stepping into a role steeped in history, expectations, and watchful eyes. The SUV slowed as they approached the palace gates. They were tall, painted in gold and deep brown, with the crest of Umuagu carved into the center. A pair of elephants facing each other beneath a rising sun. Beyond the gates, the palace stood proudly. It was not the mud and thatch picture outsiders might imagine. The main building was a grand cream-colored structure with high windows, modern columns, and a courtyard paved in interlocking bricks. But tradition was alive here too. Carved wooden doors, a clay pot by the entrance for ancestral blessings, and the faint scent of burning herbs drifting from somewhere unseen. A small crowd awaited her. Men in blue isiagu shirts stood in neat rows, some holding ofo staffs, symbols of their authority in the council. Their okpu caps sat slightly tilted, the sign of men of standing. The women were dressed in matching Ankara blouses and wrappers, sequins catching the sunlight, with coral beads glistening at their necks. Their ichafu headscarves were tied high, each one shaped differently, each one a statement of pride. As Adaeze stepped out of the car, the eldest elder, Pa Nwokoye, stepped forward. He was tall and lean, his face lined with the marks of age and wisdom, his voice deep and measured. In his hands was the akwu bowl containing fresh kola nuts. He broke one slowly, murmuring blessings, for fertility, for patience, for wisdom to guide her as a wife and as a leader in the community. Then he handed her a small piece to eat, a symbolic acceptance of her into the heart of Umuagu. The soft thump of the Igwe drum began, steady and warm. Two young girls, no more than 10, danced lightly before her, their arms moving gracefully, feet barely touching the ground as they welcomed her into the palace. Adaeze's heart swelled. She had been to events before, but this felt like being woven into something much larger than herself. Inside the palace courtyard, she noticed the mix of the old and new. On one side, a carved wooden stool bearing the crest of Umuagu stood beside a polished glass table. Near the main hall, a tall Ikinga statue stood proudly, the symbol of strength and personal achievement. Against the far wall, clay pots rested on a wooden shelf, ready for festival cooking. Neka, the chief's younger sister, approached with a warm smile. She wore a fitted Ankara gown of bright yellow and green, her head wrapped in a matching ichafu. "Welcome, Adaeze," she said softly. "From today, you are not just chief's wife. You are the mother of this palace. You are our sister, our leader." The words settled deeply in Adaeze's heart. She understood then that her marriage was not simply about love or companionship. It was a bridge between her and the hundreds of people who would now look to her in times of joy and trouble. After the formal greetings, she was led to her new quarters. Her bedroom was spacious, with high windows opening to the road leading toward the market. The bed was draped with Ankara print covers, a balance of modern comfort and cultural pride. On the dresser sat a small wooden bowl filled with kola nuts, an unspoken reminder of the traditions she was now part of. That night, long after the noise of the day faded, Adaeze sat by the window looking out at the quiet village. She could see the faint glow of lanterns from the market, hear the distant laughter of young men returning from an evening game of football. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. A wife may marry a man, but she must also marry his people. She knew she had stepped into a new life, one that would demand patience, wisdom, and courage. And as she lay down to sleep, the sound of the Igbo drum still lingered in her ears, steady, timeless, and welcoming. The first morning in the palace began before the sun was fully awake. The soft crow of roosters came from somewhere beyond the high palace walls, blending with the muffled chatter of market women already making their way to the square. Adaeze rose from her bed, the Ankara print duvet slipping off her shoulders, and walked to the wide window. From there she could see the road stretching toward the market, motorcycles weaving past women, balancing baskets on their heads, children in neatly pressed uniforms heading to school. The palace had its own pulse, and she was learning to feel it. At the heart of it all was the large courtyard, paved with neat interlocking bricks and shaded by two massive udala trees, whose branches stretched like protective arms over the space. Palace staff moved quietly but purposefully. The security guards in crisp uniforms greeted her with respectful nods. The gardeners trimmed the hibiscus flowers lining the walls. And from the kitchen came the rhythmic thud of a pestle meeting a mortar. As the royal wife, Adaeze quickly discovered that her role was far more than ceremonial. Mornings were spent overseeing the palace kitchen, where women in brightly patterned Ankara wrappers prepared meals not only for the chief and his household, but also for guests, council members, and anyone in need who happened to arrive during the day. The kitchen was a mix of old and new. A large gas cooker stood beside a row of clay pots, each one reserved for a particular dish. On one shelf, shiny stainless steel trays held jollof rice and grilled chicken. On another, smaller calabash bowls cradled freshly made okra soup. Every detail mattered. In Igbo tradition, food carried meaning. It was a way of showing care, unity, and respect. When a visitor was served pounded yam in a smooth earthenware bowl, it was not just to fill their stomach. It was to honor their presence. Adaeze insisted that meals be prepared with this in mind, and soon her attention to presentation became something the staff admired. After the kitchen rounds, she often joined Chief Ibu in the open pavilion for council meetings. The pavilion was a modern structure with polished marble flooring, but it was framed by carved wooden pillars depicting scenes of farming, marriage, and festivals. The long table was set with notepads and bottled water, but in one corner sat an OFO staff, a reminder that decisions here were rooted in ancestral guidance. The council discussions ranged from land disputes to plans for building new classrooms in the village school. Adaeze rarely spoke unless invited, but when she did, it was with measured words. She had quickly learned that in leadership, silence could be as powerful as speech. Outside of formal meetings, Adaeze made a point to interact with the people. Sometimes she visited the market, her presence drawing smiles and greetings. The market itself was vibrant, rows of stalls shaded with colorful umbrellas, vendors selling everything from smoked fish and ground crayfish to fabrics and jewelry. She always took time to greet the older women sitting behind their wares, some of whom clasped her hands and offered blessings for her marriage. Yet life in the palace was not without its undercurrents. She began to notice the subtle rivalries among the staff. Ogechi, the palace seamstress, was fiercely protective of her position, often whispering to others about how things used to be done before Adaeze arrived. Chidi, the chief's personal assistant, was efficient but guarded, rarely speaking to her unless it was strictly necessary. These tensions weren't loud, but they hummed in the background like a drumbeat only some could hear. Adaeze approached these matters with quiet observation. She knew better than to confront them directly at first. Instead, she sought to bridge gaps, inviting both Ogechi and Chidi to help her plan small palace events, ensuring they worked side by side. Slowly, the icy politeness between them began to thaw. Evenings were Adaeze's favorite time. The palace courtyard came alive with softer sounds, the laughter of children playing tag, the smell of roasted maize wafting from a roadside vendor, the low murmur of elders discussing the day. Sometimes the chief's relatives would gather, bringing with them bowls of fresh fruits or bottles of palm wine. Adaeze would sit with the women, listening to their stories of past festivals, learning the history of the families that made up Umuagu. One evening, while walking along the palace garden path, she came across a young boy sitting alone near the gate. His clothes were worn, his sandals dusty, and in his lap was a small bottle of palm oil. She asked where his parents were, and he explained quietly that his father had been sick for months and could no longer farm. His mother sold palm oil to keep the family fed. That night, she brought the matter to Chief Ibu. "If we help one family," she said gently, "it may seem small, but if we make it possible for others to do the same, we can change the whole village." This was how the idea of a small community assistance fund was born. A pool of resources to help struggling families in times of illness, crop failure, or school fees. The next morning, she visited the women's group in the square to share the plan. The group met every Thursday under the shade of a large mango tree, sitting on a mix of wooden benches and plastic chairs. The women were dressed in a cheerful mix of Ankara prints, some with ichafu tied high, others with hair uncovered. As Adaeze spoke, she could see their eyes light up. They began suggesting ways to contribute. Some offered to donate small amounts from market sales. Others promised labor for community projects. By the end of her first month in the palace, Adaeze felt herself settling into the rhythm of her new life. She was no longer the outsider from Enugu, but a figure the people were beginning to trust. They saw in her someone who listened, someone who respected the old ways, but was unafraid to bring new ideas. Still, she knew this was only the beginning. The palace was a place of both grace and pressure. A single wrong word could strain relationships. A single act of neglect could turn admiration into suspicion. But she was ready. Every day was another chance to learn, to build, and to earn the title of Adaeze of Umuagu. Not just by marriage, but by merit. That night, as she walked through the palace corridor toward her bedroom, the cool tiles under her feet and the faint scent of hibiscus in the air, she paused at the Ikenga statue in the hallway. She placed her hand lightly on it, whispering a silent promise to herself. "I will honor this home, these people, and the path I have chosen." And with that, the royal wife's journey into the heart of Umuagu deepened, each step weaving her more firmly into the story of the palace. The first sign of trouble came quietly, like a whisper in the wind. It was early August, the time when farmers usually began bringing in baskets of fresh yams, cassava, and maize from their fields. But this year, the market stalls looked bare. Instead of overflowing heaps of produce, there were only small piles, their prices climbing higher each day. One evening, as Adaeze walked through the palace courtyard, she overheard two women talking in low tones. "If the rains don't come soon," one said, "we will finish what we have in the barns before the next moon." The other shook her head. "And you know the traders from Umuchi have stopped bringing maize. They say our people insulted them last season." Adaeze felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that when food became scarce, tempers could flare. She had seen it in the city. Shortages bred suspicion, and suspicion bred conflict. She decided to speak to Chief Ibu that night. When she found him in his study, he was seated in his carved wooden chair, the ofo staff resting against the wall beside him. His brow was furrowed as he flipped through a report. "The crops are failing," he said before she could speak, "and the farmers blame Umuchi for blocking the stream that waters our fields. My council wants me to send a warning to their leaders." Adaeze sat beside him. "And if they refuse to open the stream?" He sighed. "Then we prepare for a fight." The thought troubled her. A fight between the two villages would do more harm than good. Umuagu and Umuchi were linked by decades of intermarriages, shared festivals, and trade. Cutting ties would not just mean fewer goods in the market, it would tear apart families. She leaned forward. Sometimes a wise leader is not the one who wins the fight, but the one who stops it from starting. Chief Ibu looked at her, curiosity in his eyes. "And how would you stop it?" Adaeze hesitated, then shared her idea. Instead of sending threats, they could extend an invitation, a gesture of peace disguised as celebration. Umuagu would host a joint gathering, inviting Umuchi's elders, youth, and traders to a day of cultural exchange. There would be music, food, and the symbolic breaking of kola nuts, a ritual so sacred it could reset relationships. "It will remind them that we are not strangers," she said softly. "We are kin." Chief Ibu rubbed his chin, thinking, "It is risky. If they refuse the invitation, we will look weak." "Or," Adaeze replied, "if they accept, we will look wise." The next day, messengers dressed in blue Ankara wrappers and carrying letters tied with palm fronds set out for Umuchi. The letter spoke not of disputes or accusations, but of friendship and unity. It invited them to come and bless the harvest season together, even if the harvest was small. For a week, the palace waited. Some villagers whispered that the plan was foolish, that the Umuchi leaders would laugh at the gesture. But Adaeze remained calm, spending her days visiting the women's group and encouraging them to prepare small gifts, woven mats, calabash bowls, and baskets of dried fish to present to the visitors if they came. On the 7th morning, the sound of drums echoed from the main road. Adaeze stepped onto the balcony and saw a line of people approaching. Men in red Isiagu shirts walked alongside women carrying trays of kola nuts and palm wine. The Umuchi delegation had arrived. The palace courtyard filled quickly. Elders from both villages sat on opposite sides at first, the air thick with unspoken grievances. But when Pa Nwakoye, Umuagu's eldest elder, stood with the ofo staff in hand, silence fell. He welcomed the guests and lifted the kola nut high. "In our land," he began, "a kola nut is never eaten alone. It calls for company, for laughter, for peace." He broke it, handing the first piece to Umuchi's oldest elder, a gesture of deep respect. Palm wine followed, poured into carved wooden cups. Slowly, the tension began to melt. The conversations grew warmer, and soon the courtyard was alive with the sound of ojin gongs and talking drums. Women danced in colorful Ankara, their coral beads clinking as they moved. Children from both villages played together, chasing each other around the udala trees. Chief Ibu leaned toward Adaeze, a small smile on his face. "You were right. This was the better fight to win." By the end of the day, an agreement had been reached. The Umuchi elders promised to open the blocked stream, and in return, Umuagu pledged to share part of their yam harvest the following season, no matter the size. That evening, as the visitors departed, the air in Umuagu felt lighter. People greeted each other with renewed warmth, and the market stalls buzzed with talk of new trade deals. Later, as Adaeze prepared for bed, Neka entered her room with a wide grin. "You know, the women in the market are calling you the peacemaker of Umuagu." Adaeze laughed softly. I am just doing what is right." But deep down, she understood something important. Leadership was not about titles or positions. It was about knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to act. It was about seeing beyond the present anger to the future that could be built. In the days that followed, she noticed small changes. The palace staff seemed more at ease, the market traders more cheerful. Even Ogechi, the seamstress who had once been distant, brought her a new wrapper as a gift, an Ankara print in shades of deep blue and gold. One afternoon, as Adaeze walked through the village, she passed a group of young boys playing football. One of them stopped, calling out, "Mama Umuagu, when I grow up, I want to be like you." She smiled, waving back. That night, she stood once again before the Ikenga statue in the palace hall. She placed her hand on its carved horns and whispered, "May I always have the wisdom to choose peace over pride." For Adaeze, the trial had been more than a test of her role as the royal wife. It had been a lesson in the delicate art of balancing tradition with modern solutions, of holding firmly to respect while bending toward understanding. And though she knew there would be other challenges ahead, she also knew she had earned something precious, the trust of her people. The new Yam Festival had always been the pride of Umuagu, but this year it carried a deeper meaning. The stream had been reopened, peace with Umuchi restored, and the harvest, though smaller than usual, was enough to bring hope back to the people. For Adaeze, it was more than a festival. It was a chance to weave the threads of unity tighter than ever. Preparations began weeks in advance. The palace courtyard transformed into a hive of activity. Men hung bright fabrics between pillars, their hands working quickly as they secured strings of colored lights. Women gathered under the udala trees, slicing vegetables, roasting ground nuts, and washing clay pots until they gleamed. The air was filled with the scent of smoked fish, fresh herbs, and ripe plantains. Adaeze walked among them, offering encouragement. She wore a fitted Ankara gown in shades of deep wine and gold, her hair wrapped in a matching ichafu tied in a layered knot at the back. Around her neck, coral beads rested in graceful loops, catching the sunlight as she moved. The younger women watched her closely, admiring how she blended tradition with a touch of modern elegance. The festival morning began with the sound of the talking drum. Its beats rolled like waves across the village, calling everyone to gather. From her bedroom balcony, Adaeze watched as people poured into the palace grounds. Men in red and blue Isiagu shirts arrived in small groups, their okpu caps tilted just so. Women came in wrappers and blouses adorned with sequins, some carrying baskets of yams decorated with yuli patterns in white chalk. By mid-morning, the square outside the palace was alive with color. Market stalls displayed woven mats, handmade jewelry, and wooden carvings of elephants and masks. Children darted between the stalls, laughing as they licked sugarcane stalks. The air was thick with music, flutes, ojin gongs, and the deep thump of the Igbo drum. As the royal wife, Adaeze's role was both ceremonial and symbolic. She stood beside Chief Ibu at the front of the palace steps, holding a small woven basket containing the first yams of the season. When the chief priest approached, a tall, lean man in a flowing white robe and coral beads, she handed the basket to him with both hands, bowing slightly. The chief priest lifted the yams high and spoke words of blessing, thanking God for life, peace, and the harvest. He touched the yams to the Ofo staff, then placed them back into the basket. The symbolism was clear. These were not just yams, but a promise of continuity and sustenance for the entire community. After the blessing, the crowd erupted in applause, and the festivities began in full. The masquerade dancers entered the square, their costumes a riot of colors, red, yellow, green, layered with raffia and cowrie shells. Their movements were swift and deliberate, each step telling a story passed down through generations. The crowd clapped and cheered, children squealing as the dancers twirled and leapt. Adaeze moved through the crowd, stopping to greet elders seated on wooden stools beneath a large canopy. Each elder she greeted blessed her in return, some holding her hands, others patting her shoulder with affection. She took time to listen, whether it was an old woman speaking of her late husband's farm, or a trader explaining how the reopened stream had revived his sales. Later in the day, she hosted the women's cooking competition, a long-standing tradition of the festival. Each contestant presented her dish on a wooden tray, decorated with fresh leaves. There was yam porridge with dried fish, egusi soup thick with pumpkin leaves, and pepper soup so aromatic it drew curious onlookers from across the square. Adaeze tasted each dish carefully, offering smiles and kind words before declaring the winner. Mama Nkechi, whose pounded yam was as smooth as silk, and whose vegetable soup carried the perfect balance of spice and flavor. "Your hands," Adaeze told her, "are a blessing to this village." The crowd cheered, and Mama Nkechi beamed with pride, receiving her prize of a new cooking pot and a set of woven baskets. As the sun began to dip, the festival shifted into its evening phase. Lanterns strung across the palace courtyard flickered to life, casting a warm glow over the gathering. The music softened to a steady rhythm, inviting couples to dance. Chief Ibu joined Adaeze on the stage, thanking the people for their unity and resilience. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward, her voice carrying over the crowd. "My brothers and sisters," she began, "a harvest is not measured only by the size of the yams, but by the strength of the hands that plant them and the hearts that share them. This year has tested us, but we have shown that when we stand together, we cannot fall apart." Her words drew applause, and a few elders nodded in quiet agreement. She continued, "Let us not wait for hardship to unite us. Let unity be our daily bread, our shared fire, and our inheritance for our children." The crowd erupted in cheers, and someone began to chant her name. Soon the chant spread, "Adaeze! Adaeze!" She felt a rush of warmth, not pride for herself, but gratitude for the bond that had grown between her and the people. The night ended with fireworks, their colors bursting against the dark sky. Children gasped and clapped, couples leaned into each other, and the elders smiled from their seats. Adaeze stood beside Chief Ibu, watching the lights reflect in his eyes. "This," he whispered, "is the Umuagu I have always dreamed of, a people proud of their roots and ready for the future." She smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Then let's make sure this is only the beginning." When the last firework faded, the crowd began to disperse, but the feeling of togetherness lingered in the air. People left with smiles, full bellies, and stories to tell. Adaeze knew they would remember this festival not just for its beauty, but for its message, that peace, once planted, must be nurtured like the yam, watered with patience, and harvested with joy. That night, as the palace quieted, Adaeze removed her coral beads and placed them carefully in their box. She sat by the window for a while, listening to the distant laughter from the village. In the courtyard below, the last of the lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, their light dancing across the bricks. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of the day settle in her heart. She knew challenges would come again. No village was without them, but she also knew something stronger had taken root in Umuagu. And for the first time since arriving, she felt not just accepted, but truly woven into the life of the people. Months passed after the Festival of Unity, and the season of scarcity became only a memory. The fields surrounding Umuagu, once dry and bare, were now green and full of life. Yams lay in neat mounds in the barns, cassava roots thick beneath the soil, and the market square thrummed with the cheerful noise of trading. The Community Assistance Fund Adaeze had suggested during the drought had grown stronger. What began as a small collection to help one sick farmer had turned into a reliable system managed by a group of trusted elders and women leaders. Families in need could now receive help for school fees, medical bills, and small business support. The people had taken ownership of it, giving not because they were forced to, but because they saw it as their collective responsibility. For Adaeze, the change was more than just physical. It was in the way people looked at one another. At the market, women from different families greeted each other with warmth. The young men who once avoided palace duties now volunteered for community cleanups. The relationship with Umuchi remained steady, with goods moving freely between the two villages and children from both sides playing together during market days. Her life in the palace had found a comfortable rhythm. Each morning still began with kitchen rounds, but now the staff greeted her not out of obligation, but with genuine smiles. Even Ogechi, the palace seamstress who had once kept her distance, often brought her new designs to approve. Chidi, the chief's personal assistant, now briefed her on important matters when the chief was away, trusting her judgment on palace affairs. Chief Ibu himself seemed lighter in spirit. They often sat together in the evenings, watching the courtyard as the hibiscus flowers closed for the night. "You have given this palace a heart," he told her one evening. "I have always had the title, but now we have the soul." It wasn't only within the palace walls that her influence was felt. She had begun working with the women's group to organize skill workshops, tailoring, soap making, and small-scale farming techniques. The goal was not just to help women earn extra income, but to give them confidence and independence. When a woman can feed her family without waiting for help, Adaeze told them, she holds her head high no matter where she walks. One afternoon, she was approached by a group of young girls who often lingered at the palace gates. They were shy at first, giggling among themselves until one stepped forward. "We want to learn how to be like you," she said, "to speak well, to dress well, to help people." Adaeze smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. She invited them to the palace the following Saturday. There, under the shade of the Udala tree, she began what would become a monthly mentorship gathering. They discussed everything, from keeping one's word, to balancing ambition with humility, to honoring family values without losing individuality. She didn't just teach them about palace etiquette, she taught them about life. In private moments, she sometimes thought of her own journey, from the young woman in Enugu who met Chief Ibu at a gala, to the royal wife who had navigated drought, political tensions, and community rebuilding. It had not been without challenges. There were still moments when she missed the anonymity of city life, the ease of blending into a crowd. But here, in Umuagu, she had found something deeper: purpose. Years moved quietly, each one weaving her more tightly into the story of the village. Her daughter, Nenena, grew into a poised young woman, tall and graceful, with the same quiet strength that Adaeze's mother once admired in her. It was no surprise when Nenena announced her engagement to the son of a neighboring chief. The weeks leading to Nena's installation as a royal wife in her new community were filled with both joy and nostalgia. Adaeze took out the box of coral beads she had worn on her first day at the palace. Sitting with Nenena in her bedroom, she placed the beads gently around her daughter's neck. "These are more than ornaments," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They carry the weight of service, the beauty of respect, and the strength of patience. They will remind you that leadership is not about being seen, but about seeing others." Nena nodded, her eyes shining. "I will not forget." The day of the installation, the palace buzzed with activity, just as it had when Adaeze first arrived. But this time, she was not the new bride learning her place. She was the matriarch, watching her daughter step into the role she had worn for decades. During the ceremony, elders whispered about Adaeze's years of service, the peace she had nurtured, and the programs she had started. To the younger generation, she was more than Chief Ibu's wife. She was Mama Umuagu, the woman who could turn a disagreement into a handshake, a drought into a harvest, and strangers into family. When the final kola nut of the day was broken and the guests began to leave, Adaeze lingered in the courtyard. She looked at the palace walls, at the Ikenga statue standing proudly in the hall, at the garden where children still played as the sun dipped low. She thought of her mother's old words: "A wife may marry a man, but she must also marry his people." She had done exactly that, and in return, they had married her into their hearts. That evening, as the lantern swayed gently in the warm night air, Adaeze stood by the balcony with Chief Ibu. The sounds of laughter and distant drums floated up from the village. The chief turned to her, his voice soft. "One day, they will tell stories of you to children who have not yet been born." Adaeze smiled faintly. "And I hope the stories remind them that the true crown is not on the head, but in the heart." Far below, in the quiet courtyard, the Udala tree rustled as if in agreement. And so, the royal wife of Chief Ibu left not just memories, but a legacy of peace, of service, and of a love that bound her to her people forever.